What's up, everyone? Today, we're going back to the era that built modern America, the industrial period after the Civil War. From the 1860s through the early 1900s, a handful of inventors, businessmen, and new ideas can completely transform the American economy. We're covering 15 key people, terms, and events that shaped this era, all in alphabetical order. Let's get into it. Number 1. Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell was a Scottish-born inventor and scientist, best known for patenting the first practical telephone in 1876. He originally studied sound and speech, largely inspired by his mother's deafness and his father's work in the field of elocution. His famous patent, U.S. Patent Number 174,465, became one of the most valuable patents in history and launched the telecommunications revolution. Bell founded the Bell Telephone Company in 1877, which eventually grew into American Telephone and Telegraph, better known as AT&T, one of the largest corporations in the world. Beyond the telephone, Bell contributed to the development of the photophone, which transmitted sound on a beam of light, and he conducted early experiments in aeronautics. His inventions fundamentally changed the way business was conducted during the Gilded Age, allowing instant, long-distance communication that accelerated commerce and industry. Bell's work exemplified the spirit of innovation that defined American industrialization. Number 2. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie immigrated to the United States from Scotland as a child and rose from poverty to become one of the wealthiest Americans in history. He built his fortune in the steel industry, founding Carnegie Steel Company, which by the 1890s was the largest and most profitable steel operation in the world. Carnegie was a master of vertical integration, controlling every stage of steel production from the raw iron ore mines to the finished product. His steel was used to build the railroads, bridges, and skyscrapers that defined America's industrial expansion. Despite his immense wealth, Carnegie became one of the most prominent philanthropists of his era, donating over $350 million to fund libraries, universities, and cultural institutions. He outlined his philosophy in his 1889 essay, The Gospel of Wealth, arguing that the rich had a moral obligation to distribute their fortunes for the public good. Carnegie's legacy remains deeply tied to both the industrial growth and the philanthropic ideals of the Golden Age. Number 3. Captain of Industry. Captain of Industry was a term used during the Gilded Age to describe business leaders who were seen as having a positive impact on the nation through their innovations, job creation, and philanthropy. The term stood in direct contrast to robber baron, which painted the same figures in a negative light. Supporters of this view argued that men like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Cornelius Vanderbilt drove economic progress, built industries from the ground up, and raised the overall standard of living for Americans. Captains of industry were celebrated for funding public institutions, investing in infrastructure, and pushing technological advancement forward. Carnegie's funding of over 2,500 public libraries and Rockefeller's establishment of the University of Chicago were often cited as evidence of their civic contributions. The debate over whether these figures were captains of industry or robber barons remains one of the central questions of Gilded Age history. The term captures the era's tension between celebrating individual achievement and questioning the concentration of wealth and power. Both are subjects that we see talked about widely today. Number 4. Cornelius Vanderbilt. Cornelius Vanderbilt was one of the first great American industrialists, building his fortune initially in the steamship business before shifting to railroads. He earned the name Commodore for his dominance of the steamboat industry, where he drove down fares and outcompeted rivals across the Northeast. In the 1860s, Vanderbilt turned his attention to railroads, acquiring and consolidating lines, including the New York Central Railroad, into a massive transportation network. His railroad empire connected New York City to the Great Lakes and Chicago, making him one of the wealthiest men in American history at the time of his death. Vanderbilt was known for his ruthless business tactics, including stock manipulation and price wars, which crushed competitors and drew public criticism. He invested in infrastructure like Grand Central Depot in New York City, which became a symbol of the railroad age. Vanderbilt's career spanned nearly the entire 19th century and helped establish the template for the industrial tycoon that would define the Gilded Age. Number 5. George Westinghouse. George Westinghouse was an American inventor and industrialist who played a pivotal role in the development of alternating current electrical power. He held over 360 patents during his lifetime, beginning with the railroad air brake in 1869, which dramatically improved train safety and became standard across the industry. Westinghouse recognized the potential of Nikola Tesla's AC system and purchased Tesla's patents, positioning himself as the chief rival to Thomas Edison's direct current power. The resulting quote, war of currents, quote, between Westinghouse AC system and Edison's DC system was one of the defining technological battles of the Gilded Age. Westinghouse's AC system won out because it could transmit electricity over much greater distances, making it far more practical for powering cities and industries. His company lit the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a dramatic public demonstration of AC power's superiority. Westinghouse's contributions to electrical infrastructure helped make widespread electrification possible and fundamentally transformed American industry and daily life. Number 6. Henry Ford. Henry Ford was an American industrialist who revolutionized manufacturing through his development of the moving assembly line. While he did not invent the automobile, his Ford Motor Company, founded in 1903, made car ownership accessible to the average American through the mass production of the Model T. The moving assembly line, implemented at Ford's Highland Park plant in 1913, reduced the time to build the car from over 12 hours to roughly 93 minutes. Ford also introduced the $5 workday in 1914, which was roughly double the average factory wage at the time, attracting skilled workers and reducing turnover. This higher wage also had the effect of creating a consumer base that could afford to buy the very products they were manufacturing. The Model T, produced from 1908 to 1927, sold over 15 million units and then transformed the automobile from a luxury item into an everyday necessity. Ford's methods of mass production became the standard for manufacturing across industries and represented the culmination of the principles that drove American industrialization. Number 7. Horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is a business strategy in which a company acquires or merges with competitors operating at the same level of production within an industry. The most famous example of this strategy during the Gilded Age was John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, which systematically bought out competing oil refineries across the country. By eliminating competition, a company using horizontal integration could control pricing, dominate the market, and establish a monopoly. Rockefeller used tactics like temporary slashing prices to undercut rivals, negotiating secret rebates with railroads, and pressuring competitors to sell or be driven out of business. At its peak, Standard Oil controlled approximately 90% of oil refining in the United States. Horizontal integration was one of the key strategies that led to the massive concentrations of wealth and economic power that defined the Gilded Age. The practice eventually drew public outrage and government intervention, most notably through the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, which sought to break up monopolistic business combinations. 8. John D. Rockefeller. John D. Rockefeller was the founder of Standard Oil and is widely considered the wealthiest American in history when adjusted for inflation. He entered the oil refining business in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1860s, and through aggressive use of horizontal integration, he consolidated nearly the entire American oil refining industry under his control. Standard Oil, incorporated in 1870, grew to control about 90% of U.S. oil refining by the early 1880s, making it the most powerful monopoly the country had ever seen. Rockefeller's business tactics included negotiating secret railroad rebates, undercutting competitors' prices until they folded, and organizing the Standard Oil Trust to manage his vast holdings. His dominance drew intense criticism from journalists and politicians, and Standard Oil became the primary target of the Sherman Antitrust Act. In 1911, the Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil broken into 34 separate companies, several of which, including ExxonMobil and Chevron, remain major corporations today. Like Carnegie, Rockefeller became a major philanthropist later in life, establishing the Rockefeller Foundation and funding institutions in education, medicine, and scientific research. Number 9. J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan was the most powerful banker and financer of the Gilded Age, wielding enormous influence over American industry and the national economy. He specialized in reorganizing and consolidating struggling railroads, a process known as Morganization, which stabilized entire sectors of the transportation industry. Morgan's most famous deal came out in 1901, wherein he orchestrated the creation of U.S. Steel by purchasing Andrew Carnegie's steel company for $480 million, making it the first billion-dollar corporation in history. His influence extended beyond business into government. During the Panic of 1893 and again during the Panic of 1907, Morgan personally organized bailouts to stabilize the U.S. financial system. Morgan's dominance raised serious concerns about the concentration of financial power in private hands, and his actions were a major factor in the eventual creation of the Federal Reserve System in 1913. He sat on the boards of dozens of major corporations and used interlocking directorates to exert control across banking, railroads, and industry. Morgan embodied both the power and the danger of unchecked financial influence during America's industrial era. Number 10. Monopoly. A monopoly occurs when a single company or entity gains exclusive control over a particular industry or market, effectively eliminating all competition. During the Gilded Age, monopolies became one of the defining features of the American economy as industrial titans used strategies like horizontal and vertical integration to crush or absorb their rivals. Standard Oil's control of roughly 90% of American oil refining and Carnegie's steel dominance of the steel industry were among the most prominent examples. Monopolies allowed their owners to set prices without market pressure, dictate terms to suppliers and workers, and accumulate enormous personal wealth. Critics argued that monopolies harmed consumers through inflated prices, stifled innovation by removing competitive incentives, and gave private individuals more economic power than elected governments. Public backlash Public backlash against monopolistic practices grew throughout the 1880s and 1890s, eventually leading Congress to pass the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. The struggle between monopolistic corporations and government regulation became one of the central political conflicts of the era and laid out the groundwork for modern antitrust law. Number 11. Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla was a Serbian-American inventor and electrical engineer whose work on alternating current power systems fundamentally changed the way electricity was generated and distributed. He immigrated to the United States in 1884 and briefly worked for Thomas Edison before the two had a falling out over the merits of AC versus DC power. Tesla developed the polyphase AC motor and transformer system, which solved the critical problem of transmitting electrical power over long distances, something Edison's DC system could not do efficiently. He sold his AC patents to George Westinghouse, and together they defeated Edison in the, quote, War of Currents, end quote, establishing AC as the standard for electrical power worldwide. Tesla's AC system powered the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition and was later used in the first major hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls in 1896. Despite his brilliance, Tesla struggled financially for much of his life, as many of his more ambitious ideas, including wireless power transmission, were never commercially realized until the early 2000s. Tesla's contributions to electrical engineering were foundational to the electrification of industry and society during the Second Industrial Revolution. Number 12. Robber Baron. Robber baron was a derogatory term applied to wealthy industrialists and financiers of the Gilded Age who were seen as having built their fortunes through exploitation, corruption, and unfair business practices. The term drew a comparison to medieval lords who charged illegitimate tolls on travelers, suggesting that these modern industrialists extracted wealth from society without providing fair value in return. Critics accused robber barons of exploiting workers through low wages and dangerous conditions, manipulating markets and stock prices, bribing politicians, and using monopolistic tactics to destroy competition. Figures like Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, and Carnegie were frequently labeled robber barons by journalists, labor activists, and reform-minded politicians. The term gained wider use during the 1930s when historian Matthew Josephson published his influential book, quote, The Robber Barons, in 1934, which characterized these figures as greedy and destructive. The robber baron label stood in direct opposition to the, quote, captain of industry, end quote, view, which celebrated the same figures for their contributions to economic growth and philanthropy. Number 14. Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison was one of the most prolific inventors in American history, holding 1,093 U.S. patents over the course of his career. He established the world's first industrial research laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, in 1876, earning him the nickname, quote, the Wizard of Menlo Park. Quote, Edison's most famous invention, the practical incandescent light bulb, was developed in 1879 and fundamentally changed daily life by extending productive hours beyond daylight. He also developed the first commercial electrical power distribution system, launching the Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan in 1882, which delivered direct current electricity to nearby customers. Beyond lighting, Edison invented the phonograph and made major improvements to the motion picture camera, establishing himself as one of the era's foremost inventors. Edison clashed with Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse in the, quote, War of Currents, end quote, championing his DC system against their AC alternative, a battle he ultimately lost. Despite that defeat, Edison's approach to organized, systematic invention and his creation of the modern research laboratory were arguably his most lasting contributions to American history. Number 15. Vertical integration. Vertical integration is a business strategy in which a company controls multiple stages of production within its industry, from raw materials to finished products. The most prominent example of during the Gilded Age was Andrew Carnegie's steel empire, which owned the iron ore mines in Minnesota's Mesabi Range, the coal fields that fueled his furnaces, the railroads and ships that transported materials, and the mills that produced the final steel. By controlling every step of the supply chain, Carnegie eliminated the need to pay intermediaries, reduced costs at every stage, and undercut competitors on price. This strategy gave vertically integrated companies an enormous competitive advantage because they were insulated from price fluctuations and supply distributions that affected rivals who depended on outside suppliers. Vertical integration also allowed companies to maintain consistent quality control across the entire production process. Combined with horizontal integration, which focused on eliminating competitors at the same level of production, vertical integration was one of the two foundational strategies that built the great industrial monopolies of the Gilded Age. The practice demonstrated how the consolidation of economic power during this era went far beyond simply owning a single factory or business. And that wraps up 15 key terms from the industrialization era. From the railroads and oil refineries to the electrical grid and the assembly line, this was the period that transformed America from an agricultural nation into an industrial superpower. The people and ideas we covered today didn't just shape the Gilded Age, they built the foundation of modern American economy. Thanks for watching. If you're looking for other references or works cited, you can find them in the description. Have a nice day.